few moment.
Yes, sir. So Brad Kiger, I'm originally from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I moved to the DC area in 2014. New for me and my wife. We didn't know anybody. We got there. I was a school teacher. I taught for about a year and a half in DC. Long story short is in 3 years of teaching there, they were going to pay off my student loans. I made it 2/3 of the way. About February 2016 is when I decided to get licensed. And Scott, I didn't even tell anybody other than my wife that I was doing that, because I was the fear of failure, right? Telling everybody, hey, I'm going to get a real estate license, and failing at it. So that's kind of the mindset, the way that my mind worked at that time. And so I get licensed, and my original goal is to sell 2 to 3 houses a year. Supplement my teaching income. I had good benefits. I like teaching. I was probably going to move school districts, but overall I like teaching. I was a special ed teacher. And then everything changed really that summer. I sold one house. I went through Bold in August, and I went to the first session of Bold because it was free, and they said, and the next week I was supposed to start teaching. Go back to teaching. This was in August. And, I went to that first week. I read Millionaire Real Estate Agent. I'd sold one house. So I went home and told my wife I was quitting, and I was going into real estate full time, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's go back to that, Brad. That was a big change. And one of the things I wrote down to ask you was, let's talk about making that decision to get into real estate, and then really and truly what your expectations were. Because a lot of people are going to look at you now and say, what a great success. Mm-hmm. And I want you to take them back to 2016 and what your mindset was and what your view of real estate was at that time.
My view of real estate was that, if I could sell 3 or 4 homes a year, in my market, I can make an extra, $20,000 or so, which was the financial gap that we had in our family at the time that we felt like we had, because, we were looking to start a family, and both of us were making about $50,000 a year or $60,000 a year in a very, very expensive city. Our first apartment was an hour outside the city, and it was still $1,800 a month for about 700 square feet, and so, So that's the main reason that I got my license, to be honest, Scott, was to just bridge about a $20,000 financial gap, that I felt like would, my options were to either, I looked at going to law school, I looked at going back to getting a master's degree in education for administration, and then I looked at getting a real estate license, and thankfully I decided to move forward with the licensing. And then, I went through Ignite by myself. March, April, May, I just read the 12 sections of Ignite, and I just did what the Ignite book said. And I ended up picking up 2 FSBO listings through that. And I wasn't able to go to the class because it was during my teaching hours, right? So, but I did the activities, and then I went to my team leader after like 3 or 4 weeks, and I had some questions. And she was like, "Oh my God, you're doing like the 10-4, and you're calling for sale by owners." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what the book says." It's like, if you read the book, am I doing it wrong? Because the book said that I needed to do this, and so I'm just following the instructions.
I love that. So let's talk about that first year, because you did. I remember one of the cool things is that you put yourself to Ignite, and you're somebody that you're growth orientated, so you're going to put yourself in the path of growth. So let's talk about that decision to go to Bold, because it wasn't one that you said, hey, Bold's coming, I'm going to get there. Kind of talk about how you did that, and let's start diving into the changes that happened there.
I think subconsciously I really started to like what I was seeing in real estate, the people that I was around. I was the Keller Williams community, the team leader, the team that I joined. Like, I just really liked the whole vibe that I was getting, and I thought, well, maybe one day in a couple of years, I can make a transition full time. And honestly, I read Millionaire Real Estate Agent. I went through Ignite. I started doing a lot of open houses. I started finding some very small successes, with getting confident, not necessarily sales, more just, hey, I can see where this could go somewhere. And then I got myself to somebody said, again, it was free. You go to the first session, it was free. So I said, what do I have to lose? And I went, and forever grateful for Paul Teller, the house seller, because he told me, he said, that first day, he said, you can make a choice today to change your life, and so it's really cool.
So we'll talk about that shift in thinking. We understand that Bold is a transformational class, and yet what really shifted, because you've taken Bold multiple times,
sure,
and I'm sure you've had shifts either every time that you've gone through it. So what are some of the things that shifted in the way that you think by going through Bold? How many times have you done Bold?
Graduated 8, 7 in the old, in Bold original, and 1 2.0.
Okay.
The great part about it is that so I went through the first time, and in the 8 weeks, I remember getting somewhat discouraged because, you see that, because I started at my chapter 1, right? And I was seeing people at their chapter 20, and every week they're signing 3, 4 listings. They're doing, they've got 5 or 6 under contract, and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And each week I was getting a Bold 100 pin because I was doing that every week. I was doing a Bold 100. It was just my thing, to the point where I stopped telling people that I was doing it because I was like, I don't want to just be like, I kind of felt like I was showing out, and so through that process, I felt like I was so that was like August, September, October, and I got through Bold with, I think, 1 under contract, and I had poured in, did all the activities, and honestly, I was a little discouraged. And I remember I reached out to my mentor, and he said, and I told him what I was doing, and he said, if you are being honest with me about what you're doing right now, you are going to make $250 minimum next year, minimum, and I was like, well, that's great, but it's not showing up right now, and then it started snowballing. It was December. And then January, February, I went to family reunion. I think I'd sold about 6, 8 houses, and I was doing all these activities, and I got really focused on listings after that. And Sky ended up selling 39 houses that first year for about 22 million, around 20-ish million in volume, and did around, over 400,000 in GCI that first year.
Yeah, well, what's amazing about that story, and I've heard you talk about this before, is the work that you were doing. Like, we know that activities lead to results, and you talk about the snowball effect, and yet understand that the snowball just didn't drop from the sky. Like, you worked on creating that snowball, and then that kind of created that avalanche downhill for you in future business. So let me ask you this, Brad, because I think this is how is Bold, in all your growth and coaches that you brought into your life, and what MAPS has helped you with as far as growth goes, how has it impacted your trajectory? Kind of talk about where you started, because I know you dove into that second year. Where has it led you to?
Oh, I mean, I've had, I had to beg MAPS to give me a coach in December of 2016 because they told me I needed to go through my market center, and I said, no, I want a MAPS coach. That's what the chapter 20s are doing. I want to. So I got a coach, and those first 3 months, I learned more in those 3 months than I'd learned in years, and basically setting up the database. I had a daily calendar that I followed, weekly accountability. And for 3 months, like I said, I think I only sold 1 house in January or February. It was really discouraging because I'm working 80, 90 hours a week for $0, and finally, March, April-ish time frame, it really popped for me. I think in May I sold 8 houses for like 4 or 5 million in volume just in that 1 month, and that was less than a year in the business. It really, so then it carried me on to building a team. So our second year we did about 40 million in volume. My third year we did close to 60. And then I made a decision at that point to move my family to North Carolina, and I was a team leader at the Keller Williams Greensboro office for a year during COVID while my team was still running in DC. And then I decided to pour back into that sales team late last year, and so that's where I'm at now. Is I'm currently operating my DC sales business from North Carolina, and I'm launching our North Carolina expansion team here this year. So really excited about that.
Well, that's a pretty massive trajectory change. You know, from a goal of 3 transactions to have an expansion team that closed over, you know, it's going to close. It's closed in the past over $60 million in a year. I mean, that's a huge trajectory change. How has this benefited you? Like, how is Bold mapped in your with Keller Williams? How has it benefited you personally?
I mean, how's it not, right? I mean, that's a really hard question to answer. And you know, from the very beginning, the very first thing that changed was my mindset. Right. It was really, and it didn't happen overnight. It's not like I walked out of the first class and went, I'm all about abundance now, baby. You know, it was like, you know, I would say it was just a gradual progression over time of the thought pattern of, you know, those thoughts and actions and being reinforced. And then it started just changing the whole way I thought about everything. And then personally, you know, we were able to start a family. We've got 2 kids now. You know, my wife and I have had a long journey with that. It took us almost 3 years to have our first. And we never would have been able to do that. We wouldn't have never had the money to be able to do that if I'd not gotten into real estate and taken off the way that I did. And then, you know, development-wise, leadership-wise, you know, I'm able to have conversations now with people that I never would have imagined 5 years ago, you know, having the types of conversations that I have with, you know, people that are on my team, you know, other agents that reach out to me for advice. You know, I employ 3 people, you know, I pay a salary to 3 people now. So that's 3 families that rely on me, you know, to be able to pay their bills, to be able to feed their families. I've got 6 sales agents in DC, you know, and they depend on my leadership. They depend on my mentorship. You know, so it's you know, and as I'm saying that, it's crazy. You know, even today to now to even say that out loud, the things like that, it's wild. It's unreal. It's unreal.
Well, it is, Brad. And what always just I love about you, and you know the how much I care about you, is the fact that you're constantly in that growth mode. You've talked about it. You're always doing the be, do, achieve. You're always learning from your failures. And you're continuing to go forward. By no means in this world would you ever say that you've done anything perfect. And yet you always learn and keep going. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned on this journey in real estate and maybe even in your personal life?
My number one lesson, and the thing that I ingrain into the people that I get into business with, is number one, you have got to put yourself out there. Number one, right? If you go through life in this business in general comfortable, then you're in the 90% of people that are they're comfortable, they're good. You know, they're good. They're going to do whatever, they're going to do the things that are comfortable to them and roll on. People look at the way that I did business and they think, well, he must like doing that. And you know, at times, you know, you do, but there's other things I would have rather been doing. And I knew what my goals were. I knew what I was working towards. And so I just did the things that I had to do. And a good example is yesterday, a for sale by owner came on the market in my neighborhood that I live in now. And it actually came up in my Facebook group, in our neighborhood group, is coming soon for sale by owner. I took my listing packet and I went and knocked on the door like it was a listing presentation. I said, hey, you know, my name's Brad Kiger. I live in the neighborhood. I see where you're going to put your home up for sale by owner. I'd love to interview for the job of being your listing agent. And they were shocked, you know, but they let me in the house. I got to talk to them. I got to figure out, you know, why they were doing what they were doing. I asked a lot of questions, you know, and I didn't sign it at the spot. And, you know, I sent them information. I gave them all the details. I'm going back to meet with them today. You know, that's a $600,000 property that if I had waited, you know, until they responded to my Facebook message, right? Or if I'd waited until, they went on to Zillow to get their phone number, then I missed that opportunity, right? And you're gonna miss if you don't take those shots. You're gonna miss. Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So number one is getting face to face and getting in front of people. Whether that's the whole thing about, do you do expireds or FSBOs or door knock or open houses or internet leads, or however you do business, the whole name of the game is just to have conversations with people and build relationships, right? So however you do that, you just need to win at the getting in front of people, building relationships game. And that's the game that I feel like I play every day, is the relationship game. And that might be with somebody I meet at the grocery store. That might be with a local business owner. It might be a for sale by owner. It doesn't matter what the lead is. It's all about the relationship. And then number two is show up consistent every day, right? Take days off, right? I'm not saying you have to work 24/7. And the days where you're working, work, right? And then the days where you take off, take that time off. That's something that this year that I'm really focused on with my family is, the time that I'm in work, don't cheat my family by not working. And the time I'm with my family, don't cheat my family by doing other things. So, that's the two, keys to success. If in my mind, if you can do those two things, if you can put yourself out there, come from contribution and build relationships and show up consistently for everyone that's in your world, then you're going to win.
Brad, it's interesting that you brought it up that way. Counterbalance. People are Gary talks about this in the one thing, Gary Keller does. There is no such thing as balance. It's counterbalance.
It is 100%.
Be at work, be at work, be at home, be at home. Don't cheat either one of them, and that happens a lot in our industry, right?
Yeah, I'll catch myself, looking at, while I'm lead generating, looking at Facebook, looking at Instagram, looking at emails, and the reminder to myself is that I choose right now not to cheat my family. So I'm going to get back to doing the thing that is a little bit more uncomfortable that I may, if I had an absolute choice, may not do. I may be looking at Facebook is a better, an easier way to go about things than reaching out and adding value to people. So I catch myself a lot, and I think having awareness around it, having a set calendar and following through on those, not 8 hours a day, 2-3 hours a day, be really intentional with your time.
I love that. And that's such a cool thing. But that leads me to this question, and you kind of hit on it right there. I was going to say your younger self, you're a young man still. But let's say that you could go back and talk to the younger you. What advice would you give them, around real estate, around family, around business? Like, what would you give yourself if you were younger? What would you tell yourself from what you've learned so far?
It's counterintuitive to what got me kind of where I am today as quick as I did. I would say a little bit of slow down a little bit. I look back at, I feel like 2016 was just yesterday, and so everything has gone by so quickly. And whenever I first started, I was like a machine gun, and just I was everywhere, and I got some success from it. And had I been more intentional about follow-up, database, building relationships, I think it would have put me in a better position than I am today. And I don't regret the way that things have happened. But if I had to give myself advice, I would say, relax, like slow down just a little bit, right? Because I didn't follow the hiring process for 3 years. So you can imagine how many people I hired and either chose to get out of business with me or vice versa over the course of my first 3 years in building this mega team. And it's not fair to you, and it's not fair to them to put people in positions where they can't win. So that's something that I've really had to take a step back and look at is, how do I win with people? How do people win with me? And how do I make sure when I get into business with someone that it's a long-term business relationship, and not, hey, let's try this out for a couple weeks and see how it goes. Because I've been there and done that, and it's not a great way to. It's very frustrating for everyone involved. So I would say that'd be the two things. And then, it's something I continually work on every day is really being intentional with family. And And right now, Lindsay and I were talking about it last night. I worked till 10:30 last night, and she's like, I guess I'll talk to you tomorrow, and she's really good about bringing awareness to me whenever I'm being, and I appreciate that so that I can get, back on track with blocking time for them, and being more present with family. So, for what it's worth, that would be my advice to myself then and probably now too.
Well, that's such a powerful thing. This is how we fund that perfect life.
Right.
So let's not forget about the perfect life.
Yep. Yeah, exactly, right? You can't, it doesn't do any good to fund a crumbled life, right?
There you go.
So
we're funding the wrong one.
Yeah.
So, hey, I wrote this down because I thought this was pretty important. A lot of people are going to ask questions around, what do you see in the future for you? And there's two questions I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask it this way. Number one, where do you see yourself, your business? Like, what is your goal long term? And then what do you have in your growth plan that's going to help you get there?
It's a great question. So for me, I really set goals for 90 days. I like really short-term goals. I have visions, right, for the future. So, what I envision a year, 3 years, 5 years down the road, I give myself flexibility in that vision, right? Because again, right now, if I'd had a vision for 5 years ago, in 2016, if I'd set my 5-year vision and never adjusted it, I'd be selling 3 homes a year, right? So, so I think you have to have flexibility in building that vision, and it's something that I work on every day is, what do I want for my family? What do I want for my life? How do I want to spend my time, right? How much time do I want to spend working versus doing other things? Building out, for me, a big thing for me right now is wealth building. So, accruing investment properties, other business opportunities, obviously building the team that I have in DC is really important to me, and the one in Winston-Salem, because those sales teams are what fund a lot of other opportunities, right? And they get you into, for me, the investment properties are essentially homes that I go out to that I get to them and I think, man, I'd like to own this rather than list it. And I see a lot of, now in DC, I didn't do as much of that because it was, every home I walked into is $500,000 and that, but here in Winston, I walk into a lot of houses and the first thing I think is, man, I wonder what this would rent for, and so for me, I think my vision for 3-5 years down the road is to have a successful sales businesses in multiple locations with admin staff that are making 6 figures, real estate agents that are making 6 figures and hitting all their financial goals so that they can hit the goals that they have for their lives, and those are the people that I want to be in business with. And then as far as a growth plan, I continually stay in coaching, reading books. Like right now I'm reading The Go-Giver. So doing some reading, leadership training. So, I also look outside for other trainings and opportunities, and then masterminding with, the great thing is that in the position that I'm in and a lot of people out there is that, when someone reaches out to me and they say, hey, can I reach out to you and talk to you about XYZ? I'm usually more than happy to do that as long as I'm clear on what the agenda is, and so I reach out to people all the time that are top 10 in our company and say, hey, I'm going through X, Y, and Z, what would you do? And, they respond, and they say, Brad, good to hear from you. This is how I would handle that, so having those, basically growing through other people and using those relationships, because I feel like I add as much, I do my best to add value to others through my social media, through my presence online. I lay out my whole playbook for anybody, and that comes back to me tenfold from other people. So super grateful for that. So that's my long-winded answer of vision and growth. I like that. So we only have about 3 minutes left, 3.5 minutes, and I do want to ask one more question. One of the things that you mentioned was the simplicity behind real estate. Jason Abrams put it one way, and I thought it was perfect. He said, how simple is our industry? Be likable and be in contact with people. Mm-hmm. It's pretty basic.
just in a minute or so, kind of describe your day. You mentioned, it's not about getting everything done every day. It's about getting the most important thing done. Mm-hmm. So kind of go through what a day might look like in your world.
So, today's much different than it was 2-3 years ago. So, I used to be in the office at 7:15, and then there was an admin that started coming in at 7 o'clock. So I started coming in at 6:45. I wanted to be the first one there, last one to leave. Now, I spend the mornings with my family. I get my kids up. I get started about 9 o'clock. I do a team meeting, stand-up meeting with my team at 9. Then we do script practice. One day a week, we do lead gen together via Zoom. I have team meetings and then accountability meetings with my staff. So a lot of my day is meeting with my direct reports. And then I still lead generate, so I have my database. I have follow-up to do. I still stay in contact with my sphere. I'm constantly building that database with new people. So, an hour to 2 every day is spent, directly, working on that database, the follow-up and staying in contact with my people, because that referral business is much better than anything else that you can imagine, right? So, that's a typical day for me is morning meeting, script practice, and a couple hours of lead generation. And then I still go on appointments via Zoom in DC. And I have some appointments here that I go on as well. So, pretty much a typical, real estate agent day, except I might spend a little less time lead generating than I used to. And I've kind of replaced that with meetings with team members.
Well, what I think so cool about that is, number one is your day. So I can imagine your calendar. You have the 20% blocked, and I love the fact that you lead generate. A lot of times,
I think you have to.
You're either lead generating for business, lead generating for investments, or lead generating for people.
Absolutely.
And you do that on a daily basis, and I think that's so good for people to hear. We don't get away from that, and I just thought that was so powerful for them to hear that. Any party, we got about 50 seconds. Anything you want to say before we get off of here? And Brad, number one, I want to thank you for taking the time and sharing your story. You're one of my favorite people. I love the journey that you've been on and the fact that you continue to grow and push. So 30 seconds, share what you would, please.
Yeah, Scott, number one, again, grateful for you. You've been, one of my greatest coaches and one of my greatest cheerleaders. And so, thanks a lot for that. For anybody that's watching, where you're at in your journey right now, getting to where you want to go is all about people. It's either about the relationships that you build so if you're building a team, that's other agents, administrative people, operations people, building those allied resources in your market. And if you're a single agent doing business, it's the relationships that you form in your community. So that's it, Scott. Thanks, man.